Hello and welcome back to the Book Lounge, the podcast where we don't just summarize books, we live in their worlds. I'm your host, Alexa.
And I'm Sam. Today we're embarking on a truly epic journey. We're beginning a multi-part series on one of the most important autobiographies of the 20th century. A book that is not just a life story, but a history of a nation's struggle and a testament to the human spirit. Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom.
That's right. Long Walk to Freedom is a monumental work. It's dense, it's detailed, and it covers decades of profound change. So instead of rushing through it in one episode, we've decided to take our time. We're going to walk this path alongside Mandela, focusing on the key phases of his life.
And where better to start than at the very beginning? Today's episode, part 1, is all about Mandela's early life. We're going to explore his childhood in the rural villages of the Transkei, his education, and the formative influences that shapes the boy who would become the man who would change the world.
This is such a crucial part of the story, Sam. I think sometimes when we think of Nelson Mandela, we jump straight to the iconic images. The revolutionary on trial, the prisoner on Robben Island for 27 years, the elderly statesman becoming president. But we miss the foundation. We miss understanding how he became a person capable of such immense forgiveness and leadership.
Absolutely. The book itself spends a significant amount of time on these early years, and for good reason. Mandela himself writes that in his culture, your identity is inextricably linked to your family, your clan, your tribe, and the land you come from. To understand his later choices, we have to understand this foundational identity.
So in this episode, we'll be diving deep into the key points from the first sections of the book. We'll talk about his birth and early childhood in Mavoso and Kunu, his adoption into the royal household of the Tumble people after his father's death, and the incredible education he received, not in a classroom, but from tribal elders and community meetings.
And we'll be drawing out the key lessons and themes that emerge from this period. Themes like the true meaning of leadership is service, the power of education, and the importance of cultural identity. So get comfortable, everyone. Let's begin this long walk.
Act 1. The birth of Rolihlahla, roots in the soil of the Transkei. Sam, let's start at the very beginning. Nelson Mandela was born on July 18th, 1918. But he wasn't born Nelson. His birth name was Rolihlahla Mandela.
And that name itself is a story, isn't it? Rolihlahla, it's a Hausa name. What does it mean?
Literally, it means pulling the branch of a tree. But colloquially, as Mandela himself explains in the book, it means troublemaker. Now, isn't that just the most beautifully prophetic thing you've ever heard? The man who would spend his life shaking the very foundations of the apartheid state was literally named Troublemaker by his parents.
It's incredible. It almost feels like a destiny was woven into his name from day one. But of course, his parents weren't thinking about that. They were part of a vibrant, complex, and ancient social structure. Mandela was born in the tiny village of Mveso on the banks of the Mbase River and the Transkei. This is a stunningly beautiful part of South Africa, rolling hills and wide open spaces.
And his father, Gadla Henry Mpakaniswa, was a man of significant standing. He was the chief of Mveso, but he wasn't a chief in the way we might imagine, a king in a European context. His role was deeply connected to the community. He was a counselor, a judge, a leader chosen partly by lineage, but also by the consent of the people.
Right, and this is a crucial point about traditional Tembu governance that will come up again and again. But godless chieftainship was short-lived. Mandela recounts a story that is pivotal to his early life. His father got into a dispute with a local white magistrate. Can you tell us about that, Alexa?
It's a story that speaks volumes about the colonial reality of the time. The dispute was over a cow. A local tribesman had lodged a complaint with Gadla, and the chief presided over the case. But the white magistrate, representing the British colonial authority, intervened, demanding that the case be brought to him. Godla refused. He stood on the principle of his own authority and the customs of his people.
And the consequence was severe, wasn't it? The colonial administration didn't take kindly to this assertion of indigenous authority.
Not at all. As punishment for his defiance, Godla was stripped of his chieftainship, his cattle were confiscated, and his family was effectively ruined. They lost their land and their status. This was Mandela's first, though perhaps not fully understood, exposure to the brutal imbalance of power between black and white in South Africa. He saw his proud, principled father brought low by an external, unjust authority.
So the family is forced to leave Mveso. They move to the even smaller village of Kunu, where Mandela's mother, Nosekeni Fanny, had family. And it's in Kunu that Mandela spends what he describes as the most formative and happiest years of his boyhood.
Kunu is where the core of his character is formed. He describes a life that is, on the surface, simple and rural. He was a herd boy. His duty from a very young age was to look after the family's sheep and cattle. But within that simplicity was a profound education. He learned to hunt with slingshots, to gather wild honey, to drink warm, sweet milk straight from the cow. He swam in the cold streams and learned to fight with sticks with the other boys. This was a life deeply connected to nature, to the rhythms of the land.
It sounds idyllic in many ways, but it was also a life of discipline and responsibility. Looking after livestock is serious business. And he also began to learn about the social structure. He was a Mandela, but he was also part of the Madiba clan. Madiba is the clan name that so many people later used as a term of respect for him. Can you explain the importance of the clan?
Of course. In Xhosa culture and in many African cultures, the clan is perhaps more fundamental than the surname. The surname, like Mandela, identifies your immediate family. But the clan name, Madiba, connects you to a much larger, extended family, a whole network of ancestors and living relatives. To be called Madiba is to be acknowledged as part of this collective. It's a reminder that you're never alone. Your identity is shared. This concept of Ubuntu, I am because we are, is deeply rooted in this clan system.
So even as a young boy, his identity was multi-layered. Roli Halala, the individual, Mandela, the family, Madiba, the clan, and Thembu, the tribe. All of this was set against the backdrop of Kunu, which was a traditional community, but one that was already feeling the pressures of the modern colonial world.
Exactly. And one of the key pressures was Christianity and Western education. Mandela's mother, Nosekeni Fanny, was a devout Christian. She was the one who decided that Roli Hala should attend school. And so at the age of about 7, he became the first member of his family to go to a Western-style school.
And this is where Nelson enters the picture. On his very first day of school, his teacher, Miss Mindigane, tells him that from now on, his name will be Nelson. This was a common practice at the time. African children were given English names because the colonial educators found African names difficult to pronounce, or, more insidiously, saw them as inferior.
It's a moment of profound symbolic weight. The boy named Troublemaker is given the name Nelson, a name with no connection to his heritage, his family, or his culture. Mandela writes that he has no idea why he was given that particular name. It was just an arbitrary assignment. But he accepts it, as all the children did. It was just the way things were. This dual identity, Roli Hala at home, Nelson at school, is a metaphor for the duality that would characterize the lives of Black South Africans for generations, navigating their own rich culture while surviving in a world dominated by white norms.
So we have this young boy living between two worlds. The traditional world of Kunu with its cattle herding and tribal customs, and the new world of the missionary school with its uniforms, its rules, and its new name. But this balancing act was about to be completely upended by a family tragedy, or rather what seemed like a tragedy but turned into an incredible opportunity. Act 2, The Great Place, a royal education in Mkxwane.
So man, when Mandela was about 9 years old, his father Gadla became ill and died. It was a devastating loss, but in his culture, the community steps in. Mandela's mother, understandably worried about his future, made a decision that would alter the course of his life forever. She took him to the Great Place, the royal capital of Thembaland, called Mkyekswane.
And this is where he is taken in by the regent, Chief Jungintaba Dalindiebo. The regent was a powerful figure. He was effectively the acting king of the Thembu people, ruling until the rightful heir, his son Justice, came of age. The regent had been a friend and advisor to Mandela's father, and he honored that friendship by offering to raise Nelson as his own son alongside Justice and his daughter, Nomafu.
Imagine that transition. He goes from being a poor herd boy in a small village, the son of a deposed chief, to being a member of the royal household. Overnight, his life changed completely. He was given new clothes, better food, and a status he had never known. But it wasn't just a material upgrade. This was, as Mandela calls it, the center of his world. This is where he received his real political education.
And what did that education look like? It wasn't just from books. In fact, some of the most important lessons happened outside the classroom. The regent was a devout Christian and a firm believer in Western education, so he sent Nelson and Justice to the local mission school. But he was also a traditional leader, deeply committed to Thembu customs, so the boys were educated in both worlds. Precisely.
But the most fascinating part of their education was observing the regent at work. Mandela describes how he would hold court literally. People from all over Thembaland would come to the Great Place to have their disputes settled. There were cases about land, about marriage, about cattle, all the complexities of human life.
And how are these cases handled? This is a key part of the story because it directly influenced Mandela's own leadership style.
The process was profoundly democratic. The regent would listen to all sides of the argument. But he didn't just listen to the plaintiffs and defendants. He would then open the floor. Everyone present, elders, advisors, even bystanders, were encouraged to speak. A young man could criticize a chief, a woman could voice her opinion. Mandela writes that the regent would listen silently, often with his eyes closed, absorbing every word.
He wasn't just hearing the facts of the case. He was gauging the sentiment of the community. He was building consensus.
Exactly. And only after everyone had spoken, sometimes after hours or even days of discussion, would the regent finally speak. He would summarize the arguments, point out the strengths and weaknesses, and then slowly, carefully guide the assembly towards a consensus. He didn't just impose his will. His goal was to find a solution that the entire community could accept and live with. His authority came not from force, but from wisdom, patience, and respect for the collective will.
So the young Mandela is sitting there day after day, watching this masterclass in leadership. He's learning that a leader is not a dictator. A leader is a servant. A leader's job is to listen, to synthesize, to unite. This is the polar opposite of the authoritarian top-down rule of the Apartheid system he would later fight against. He was being steeped in a tradition of participatory democracy.
It's impossible to overstate the importance of this. When we see Mandela decades later negotiating with the apartheid government, what is he doing? He's patient. He listens. He works to build consensus not just among his own comrades in the African National Congress, but eventually with his enemies. He saw negotiation not as a sign of weakness, but as the highest form of leadership. And he learned that at the knee of Regent Jongintaba in Mkyekswane.
And alongside this practical political education, he was also receiving a deep cultural and historical education from the elders. One figure he mentions with particular reverence is Chief Joy, an old man who was a living repository of Thembu and Xhosa history.
Chief Joy would tell stories that stretched back for centuries. He spoke of a time before the arrival of the white man when the African people lived in peace and harmony, when the land belonged to everyone. He spoke of great African heroes and kings who fought bravely against colonial invasion. For Mandela, these weren't dry history lessons. They were epic tales of his own people's valor and resilience. They gave him a pride in his identity that was deliberately stripped away by the racist education system outside the Great Place.
This is so critical. The apartheid system was designed to make Black South Africans feel inferior, to believe that they had no history worth celebrating. But Mandela, thanks to elders like Chief Joy, knew that was a lie. He knew his people had a glorious past. This historical pride became a bedrock of his resistance. He wasn't fighting for a right he never had. He was fighting to restore a freedom that had been stolen.
And this period of his life culminates in a crucial rite of passage, his circumcision ceremony at the age of 16.
This is a major event in Xhosa culture. It marks the formal transition from boyhood to manhood. Mandela and his brother Justice, along with other boys their age, were taken to a special lodge away from the village for the ceremony. It's a painful and dangerous ritual, but it's imbued with deep meaning.
After the physical ordeal, there is a celebration. And a key speaker at this celebration was Chief Meliqili, the brother of Regent Jongintaba. And his speech, Mandela writes, was a thunderbolt that shattered the pride and joy of the moment.
What did he say?
He congratulated the young men on becoming men, but then he turned somber. He said that the ceremony was a fraud. He told them, "We are slaves in our own country. We are tenants on our own soil. We have no strength, no power, no control over our own destiny." He said they were destined to spend their lives enriching the white man, doing the most difficult and demeaning labor.
That is a devastating thing to hear at what is supposed to be a moment of triumph.
It was. Mandela says he was initially angry. He felt the chief had spoilt the day. But the words, once spoken, could not be unheard. They simmered in his mind. They were the truth. A truth that the sheltered, relatively privileged life at the Great Place had somewhat obscured. Chief Meliqili planted a seed of political consciousness that would later germinate and grow. He made Mandela understand that his manhood would not be measured by this ritual alone, but what he did with his life in the face of this oppression.
So by the time he finishes his schooling in Makakizweni, Mandela is no longer just a rural boy. He is a young man with a complex identity, educated in Western ways, steeped in Thembu tradition, proud of his history, and now painfully aware of the injustice of his people's present condition. He's poised for the next step, which will take him even further away from the world of his childhood. Act 3, the apex of youth, Clarkberry, Healdtown, and Fort Hare.
So, Sam, Mandela has completed his primary education at the mission school near the Great Place. He's a bright young man, and the regent has big plans for him. The next step is to send him to Clarkberry Boarding Institute, which was one of the highest educational institutions available to Black students in Thembuland at the time.
This is his first real step away from the protective bubble of the royal household and into a wider, more impersonal world. Clarkberry was a co-ed school run by the Methodists, and it was a culture shock. Mandela writes about feeling like a country bumpkin. He was the son of a regent, yes, but at Clarkberry, he was just one among many students.
And he experiences his first real taste of class distinction within the Black community. He meets students who are wealthier, more sophisticated, from the cities. He has to learn to navigate this new social hierarchy. But he also excels academically and athletically. He becomes a boxer, a sport he would love for the rest of his life, appreciating its discipline and strategy.
And after Clarkberry, the regent sends him to an even more prestigious institution, Healdtown, the Wesleyan College in Fort Beaufort. Healdtown was like the Eton or Harvard for Black South African elites at the time. It was a massive, formal place with strict rules and a proud tradition.
It's at Healdtown that Mandela's world expands even further. The curriculum was heavily focused on British history and culture. They read Shakespeare and Dickens. They learned Latin. The underlying message, of course, was the superiority of English civilization. This created a deep internal conflict for many students. They were being taught to admire the culture of their oppressors.
But it was also at Eeltown that he was exposed to ideas that challenged that very narrative, wasn't it?
Yes, steadily. He mentions a visiting Xhosa poet, Kroon Mokai, who came to speak. Mokai was a celebrated figure, and during his performance, he did something shocking. He praised the British Empire, as was expected, but then he suddenly stopped, turned, and pointed to a visiting African king sitting on the stage. He said, "But the house of Africa is built upon a rock," and he launched into a passionate praise poem for African heroes. Mandela says the students went wild with excitement. It was a powerful, subversive moment that affirmed their African identity in a place designed to suppress it.
So even within this system of colonial education, the seeds of resistance were being watered. After Eeltown, Mandela's academic journey reached its peak, the University College of Fort Hare. This was the only residential center of higher learning for Black South Africans in the entire country. It was a hotbed of intellectual and political activity. The future elite of African nationalism were all there.
Fort Hare was a turning point. For the first time, Mandela was surrounded by young, brilliant minds from all over Southern Africa. Zulus, Sotos, Tswanas. They debated politics, philosophy, and the future of their continent. It was here that he met Oliver Tambo, who would become his lifelong friend, law partner and leader of the ANC in exile. He also met Kaiser Matanzima, a fellow Timbu royal, who would later take a very different path, collaborating with the apartheid regime.
This is where Mandela's political consciousness truly crystallizes. He starts reading more, engaging in debates, but his time at Fort Hare is cut short in a dramatic fashion. What happened?
It revolved around the Student Representative Council, or SRC, elections. The students were unhappy with the food and the power of the authorities. They decided to boycott the SRC elections as a form of protest. Mandela was elected to the SRC, but he, along with the majority of students, resigned in solidarity with the boycott.
And the college principal, Dr. Kerr, gave them an ultimatum: accept your election to the SRC or be expelled.
Exactly. And here, we see a flash of the principled stubbornness that would define his life. He was given a chance to reconsider. The regent, Jongentaba, had sent him to Fort Hare to become a lawyer, a counselor to the king. It was a huge investment. To throw it away over a student protest seemed foolish to many. But for Mandela, it was a matter of principle. He had made a commitment to the collective action of the student body. To go back on that would be a betrayal. So he refused, and he was expelled.
He chooses solidarity over personal advancement. It's a huge moment. So he returns to Mkweziwen, tail between his legs, expecting the regent to be furious. But the regent's reaction is not what he expects, is it?
The regent is indeed angry, but he has a solution. He tells Nelson and his own son, Justice, that he has arranged marriages for both of them. He has chosen brides and paid the lobola, the bride price. For the regent, this was a normal exercise of his authority. For the two young men, educated at Fort Hare, full of modern ideas, it was a shock. They wanted to choose their own wives.
This sets up an incredible conflict between traditional authority and individual freedom. What did they do?
They felt trapped. They couldn't defy the regent, but they couldn't accept his decision. So they made a radical choice. They decided to run away. They fled Mkweziwen in the middle of the night, stealing two of the regent's prized oxen to sell for train fare. Their destination? Johannesburg, the city of gold.
Act 4. The Forging of a Leader. Key themes from the early years.
So Alexa, our young hero, the would-be lawyer, has just been expelled from university and has now run away from his guardian, effectively burning his bridges with the royal family that raised him. He's on a train to Johannesburg with no money and no prospects. It's a cliffhanger moment, and we'll pick up there in our next episode.
But before we leave this foundational period, let's step back and crystallize the key lessons and themes that emerge from Mandela's early life, as highlighted in the video summary we're discussing. These aren't just historical details, they are the building blocks of his character.
And the first theme is a big one. Freedom demands sacrifice and patience. We see this everywhere in these early chapters. His father sacrificed his chieftainship for a principle. The regent sacrificed to raise him. Mandela himself begins to make sacrifices. First, his comfort zone when he leaves for school, then his place at Fort Hare for a principal, and now his entire known life by running away to Johannesburg.
And the patience. He learned that from the tribal meetings. Change doesn't happen by decree. It happens through slow, deliberate consensus building. This lesson in patience would be tested beyond imagination during his 27 years in prison. The fight for freedom was not a sprint. It was the long walk of the title.
The second theme is perhaps the most important for understanding his leadership. True leadership means service to others. This is the lesson from The Great Place. The regent didn't rule, he served, he listened, he facilitated. Mandela didn't see leadership as a path to power and privilege, but as a burden of responsibility. This is why, even as the most famous political prisoner in the world, he never saw himself above the ANC. He was a servant of the movement.
Absolutely. The third theme is one he learned, but would later have to adapt. Nonviolence can heal deep divisions. His early influences, particularly the Christian ethos of the mission schools and the peaceful conflict resolution of the Tembu courts, instilled in him a belief in dialogue and nonviolence. Initially, he believed the apartheid government could be shamed into change through moral persuasion. It was only later, when that failed utterly, that he reluctantly turned to the armed struggle. But the foundational belief in the ultimate power of reconciliation never left him.
The fourth theme is personal to him. Education gives real empowerment. From his mother insisting he go to school, to the regent investing in his education, to his own hunger for learning at Fort Hare, Mandela understood that knowledge was a weapon. It was the only thing the oppressor could not take away from you. It empowered you to understand your world, to articulate your grievances, and to plan your liberation. His own ability to articulate the struggle so eloquently came directly from his education.
And the final and most world-famous theme, forgiveness is more powerful than revenge. Now, this is interesting. Do we see explicit forgiveness in his early years? Not really. But we see the foundations for it. We see it in the communal ethos of Ubuntu, I am because we are. If your identity is tied to the collective, then perpetual vengeance only destroys the collective. We see it in the tribal meetings where the goal was not to punish the loser, but to restore harmony to the community. The seeds of his future forgiveness were sown in the soil of Kunu in the great place of Mkweziwen.
That's a beautiful way to put it. He didn't learn forgiveness in prison, he learned it as a boy. Prison was the furnace where that early lesson was tested and tempered into unbreakable steel.
So to summarize this entire period, Mandela was not born a saint. He was a real person, shaped by a specific time and place. He was shaped by the values of Tembu democracy, the discipline of mission education, the pride of African history, and the bitter reality of racial injustice. The boy herding sheep in Kunu, listening to the stories of the elders, was undergoing the training that would one day enable him to lead a nation.
And with that, we've reached the end of part 1. When we return for part 2, we'll follow the young Mandela into the dizzying, dangerous, and transformative world of Johannesburg. We'll see him become a lawyer, join the African National Congress, and begin his deliberate march into the heart of the struggle against apartheid.
It's a journey from the quiet hills of the Transkei to the fierce political battles of the city, and we can't wait to continue it with you.
Thank you for joining us on this first leg of the Long Walk. We encourage you to read along with us. Pick up a copy of Long Walk to Freedom and explore these early chapters for yourself.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts. What struck you most about Mandela's early life? You can find us on social media at the Book Lounge Pod.
Thanks for listening.
Don't forget like, share, family, friends, and subscribe. Bye-bye.